Hi guys, this is a quick demonstration of some watercolor techniques. Here, this is the image, the close-up that I chose. You all are going to be picking a close-up of a flower or some other item that helps us look closely at something. So I have done a basic sketch of the main lines in here. I'll show you on the paper, but I've sketched these lines. And now what I'm going to try to do is to demonstrate how to blend colors. So going from this red to this pink, the pink to the orange, similar over here. So just that you know, this is my reference point, and you'll be seeing how I'm doing it in the Arts Process Journal. Just a quick note that there are different. I've taken a yellow and two kinds of reds, and I've mentioned this maybe earlier, but the one red is a warmer red, and one red is a cooler red. One red has more yellow in it, one red has more blue in it. So the one that's this is called vermilion hue, or sometimes it's just called red. What is it? I forget now. The other, anyhow, this one's called Crimson Lake, or scarlet crimson is another word for it, but it tends to be a little bit cooler, bluer. And the warm and the blue, I'm going to use both of them. So I've got them here on. This is my warm, sorry, not blue, the red. So this is my the warmer red. This is the cooler red, the crimson one, and this is the warmer one called vermilion hue over here, and cadmium red. That's the other one. Sorry, that's the I'm remembering. So and then my yellow. Okay, so as you can see here, I'm not sure if you can see the lines that I've drawn. So go ahead and draw some lines just to give yourself some kind of a guidance. It doesn't have to be exact at all. So our purpose here is not so much making this perfect painting, a perfect replication. It's more, let's go in really close into an image and just enjoy the colors we see here. It becomes very, as you would call it, abstract. So you stop seeing the flower, you start seeing the colors and the shapes and the lines inside the flower. So to start with, this is a technique I want to demonstrate, is that I'm going to blend color from pink to yellow and from pink to red here. So this section here that I've cordoned off with my line is what I'm first going to make wet. Okay, this is now a really important technique, because I want the paper to be wet only in this section, because I want the colors in this section to kind of bleed into each other or blend into each other. And if I put if I let my water, if I put water elsewhere, then the colors will go there. So now I've got a nice little amount of water on my paper, and I'm going to pick up some of the red paint here. This is the, and I'm going to start by just putting it down. So because there's water there already, I just have to kind of dab the paint in and just push it around. That's kind of the nice thing. So there's a good amount of red here. That's kind of like a pinkish red. Let me see what the other red looks like. So that was that red. And this red is, that looks very similar. Anyhow, let me put a little bit of yellow into here to make it more of a warmer red. I think, because when I look at the image, you can see here, the red here is quite a warm red. You can see that. And then it goes into this kind of a pinkish cool, and then you've got the orange up there, which is what I'm going to try to capture. All right, so I mixed some of that yellow in there I don't know if you can make out, but it's become much warmer. And now I'll put that color in, my warms here. All right, and now I'm going to go for that pink, which was actually, let me go over to the cooler version, and it probably won't make a huge difference. But if you can see how much pinker that is compared to the warm red that I mixed in there. And now this is where the fun takes place. I'm going to push that color down right to the edge there of these two. And there will be at one level there'll be a natural kind of mingling because the colors will sort of suck into each other. But if I want, I can maybe go in and actually do a little bit of mixing along the edge here to have it kind of flow a little bit more into each other. The trick in all of this is you have to work fairly fast, because once it dries with watercolors, there's not much you can do. So like see this edge here, this hard edge? I need to work on that really fast before that dries. Otherwise that edge is going to show up. So let me just kind of quickly put some color over that edge. And thankfully it didn't fully dry. And now I want to push this paint up. And especially if you're in a slightly warmer climate, you're going to find that you have to work fast, because the water you put down can start to dry pretty fast. All right, now I'm picking up some of this yellow, pure yellow here, and putting that in. If you can see, there's the color is kind of seeping out from the edge of that color I put down earlier, and I'm going to have these two meet. Okay. Now, when they start meeting, I'm going to take my brush and kind of mingle the two together here. Okay, and the fun thing about watercolor is that you never can predict what the final outcome will be. But you kind of just put the paint down and then just see what happens. All right. Now over here, I want these to blend a little bit more. So I'm kind of running out of time, because once things start to dry, then when you go back over them, you end up creating little kind of marks. You miss out on it. You lose this ability to have things blend very naturally. But I think I'm still okay. It's still not fully dried. And you see, I'm kind of mixing the two and pushing some of it up so it goes into the other section. There. So I'm pretty happy with that. If I look up at my image here, so I've got that yellow, and I've got the warm red here, and I've got this pink here. There's it gets a little bit kind of darker in the corner there, and there's a little bit of a warmth to a reddish warmth up there. So I might pick up a tiny bit of my warm red and just kind of like drop it in there, and hopefully it's not yet fully dried, and it's gonna, it's still okay, and it's going to actually, I'll clean my brush, because if you have too much paint on your brush, it starts to, so with a clean brush, I kind of go in there and mix it a little bit. The key here is that it's still wet, right? You can't do that once it starts to dry. This will create its own little shape. But because it's wet, it actually mingles and merges. There. So I have that section. Now, here's the trick. If I'm going to now move to another section. But the problem is, if this is still wet and I start on the section next to it, it's going to bleed together. And one side's going to bleed into the other, and it's going to get all messed up. So what I'll do is I'll skip one section and to let this part dry, and I'll go to my next section over, and I'll do a little bit here. So I'm going to work on this one here, which is this section here. So I want to try to get some of that like a more reddish pink and a darker red in there. Okay, so let me just pick up this is sort of the crimson red, and let me first put the water down. Very important. This is called a wet on wet method. So there's wet on dry, which is I would just pick up the paint and I go straight onto a dry piece of my paper. But wet on wet is I first put down the water in the section I want to cover, and so I'm going to do it all. Maybe just bring it all the way around there, right? And then pick up wet paint, and it has this lovely effect of spreading on its own. So I'm going to put here's the other thing, is that paint in watercolor, you don't have white. So you start light and you work dark. And you always, you start with just a little bit, a really thin layer, and then you always can get darker. So I've got that I got the pink by using just a very dilute version of the red. If I'd put a very thick red, it would have turned red, and I would have, but by making very dilute, it turns the red into this pink, this cool pink. Now I'm going to go back to this other red in which I'd mixed in some of the yellow to make it warmer, and I'm going to go just along here, along this edge, and I'm using more, it's more of a thicker mixture here, right? It's not as dilute as this here because I want it to be darker. I could make it really light by just adding more water to it, but I want this to be a little bit darker. Okay, so I'm going right along the edge there. I'm going to bring it around here. And in my image, this part is fairly dark, so let me get quite a lot of paint onto my brush here, okay? And put this in here. And bring it up here, down like that. All right, and I could bring this down here. That's oh, that got actually in the image. There's some yellow in there. So let me go back in there with yellow afterwards. But I just want to make sure that this part here is mixing nicely. Let me go in. I'm going to clean my brush, take off that extra paint, and make my brush a little bit wet, and just add I'm kind of diluting the colors here, just so that they mix a little bit more. All right, and it's super wet. I don't know if you can see how wet it is, but that's kind of fun. I'm going to let that dry and see how it ends up drying. It's a matter of pushing the paint around. I don't want to push all the paint over because then it will just be flat. I want to keep this light pink and keep this kind of darker. Maybe add a little bit more paint down. Remember, you go from light to dark. So I want this to end up being darker. So I'm just going to add paint to it, and that will just automatically make it darker, right? And then, as I said in my image, I noticed that this part is kind of yellowish. So let me go in with some of this yellow, and just on top of that, what I have there, I'm just going to add that yellow, right? Now notice that it's because we've zoomed in to the image, you start to realize that it starts to become more of an abstract painting and less about the actual representation. This needs to represent a rose, to more this is this beautiful abstract combination of colors blending to each other, lines, movement, and that's the fun of doing these close-up paintings. We end up with something really beautiful, and we end up having looked closer at our world. All right, so here, this is starting to dry, and it'll always surprise you when it dries. It'll just turn out different to what you expected. And some, like over here, if you notice, there's a bit of a line forming, a mark, because it was starting to dry, and I went in again with water over here. And that water is kind of pushing the paint this down here, which creates this line. And that's okay. These little imperfections actually make it even more beautiful. Great, guys. So that's just the beginning of a painting, but just to illustrate some techniques for blending and what we call the wet-on-wet technique of watercolor paint.